All right, let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now, getting you set for the 25-26 college basketball season. We are just 1 week away from opening night, November 3rd. I want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. And also, get into the chat. Get into your comments and thoughts on anything that lies ahead during the 25-26 college basketball season. I will get to them later in the show. But first, as always, we have to get into three big things. And the first big thing I want to talk about, even as somebody who constantly is talking about the need to not read into exhibition games, the need to not jump to conclusions, I find that the opportunity to sample these exhibition games, to watch players play, to look at rosters and rotations is the ultimate way to take inventory for the upcoming college basketball season. So as I was in my man cave all weekend long, sampling different games, watching different teams, making different anecdotes, and we're going to get to a lot of those anecdotes throughout this show. The one thing that really stood out to me more than anything is the amount of observations that I had after Kentucky's exhibition victory over Purdue for many reasons. And it was very, very notable. First of all, and again, these are just exhibition games, so a lot of things can change. First of all, you have to tip your cap to Kentucky. And I know the game was played at Rupp Arena. I know that there was a different type of energy in that game at Rupp Arena when the game is played in Lexington. And we're going to see that again later this week when Georgetown goes to Lexington to play Kentucky. But there has been so much made, and I've been somebody who's talked about it ad nauseum, about the depth that Kentucky is going to have this season. And we saw that depth firsthand against Purdue on Friday night, even if it was just an exhibition game. And the biggest thing that I took away after watching Kentucky, not just obviously play great offense, which is going to be a constant under Mark Pope, but also the job that it did on the other side of the floor. The biggest thing that I took away after watching Kentucky beat Purdue and beat Purdue handily was the ceiling has to be raised in Lexington, because this Kentucky win over Purdue, who's a consensus number one team in America, came without Jalen Lowe, the Wildcat starting point guard, and without Jaden Quaintance, who again is still attempting to come back from a knee injury that he suffered at Arizona State before he transferred. I know that this is an exhibition game, but if Kentucky was good enough to do what it did against Purdue in an exhibition game without its starting point guard, and without a player in Jaden Quaintance, who I think, if he's healthy, could be somebody who could be one of the top defensive players in college basketball, you have to start thinking about how the ceiling could be raised in Lexington. And another thing I thought about when I saw the plethora of weapons that the Wildcats had, Jalen Lowe, when he's healthy, is going to be in position to maybe lead the SEC in assists. Jalen Lowe is somebody who, when he was at Pitt last season, handed out 5.5 dimes a game. He is somebody with the vast array of weapons that's on Kentucky's roster, could spray that ball around ad nauseum. And the depth was obviously something that was well advertised and lived up to the billing. Jasper Johnson, the talented freshman, came off the bench and obviously stole the show from an offensive perspective. But 8 players for Kentucky scored between 8 and 15 points. You heard me talk about last week on the show how Mohamed Diabate would be a fan favorite for Kentucky by Thanksgiving. He looked obviously the part. 10 players played 16 minutes or more for Kentucky. Again, there was no Jalen Lowe, there was no Jaden Quaintance. But now, after seeing it in person, and this is something that is going to be an interesting story to watch all season long. I think when you look at Kentucky's roster and you look at the chemical makeup of what this team could look like in 25-26, you legitimately have 12 players who Mark Pope could put into a game against a quality opponent. Jalen Lowe, Trent Noah, Otega Owe, Muhammad Diabate, Brandon Garrison, Jasper Johnson, Denzel Aberdeen, Colin Chanier, Andrea Yelovich, who I really, really like, Jaden Quaintance if he's healthy, Cam Williams, and Malachi Moreno. 12. A 12-man rotation. It's possible. 8 of Kentucky's first 9 games are going to be in the state of Kentucky. Obviously, there's going to be the game on November 11th against Louisville at the KFC Yum Center, and then there's going to be the Champions Classic at Madison Square Garden. But looking at the makeup of this thing right now, I think whatever ceiling we had for Kentucky, it needs to be raised a bit because Kentucky was able to do what it did without Jalen Lowe and without Jaden Quaintance. And I'm curious to see, as we get into the dynamics of Kentucky, as things move along in time and people get healthier and healthier, and hopefully those 2 young men who didn't play, Jalen Lowe and Jaden Quaintance, hopefully they get to be in a scenario where they can be healthy for the guts of this non-conference schedule in December, because there's big games coming up for the Wildcats during that month. You're going to have a game against Gonzaga in Nashville. You're going to have a game against North Carolina at Rupp Arena in the ACC-SEC Challenge. And then, of course, it's the matchup with St. John's on December 20th in the CBS Sports Classic. I am hoping Kentucky is at full strength for that game. But a tremendous, tremendous first impression for the Wildcats, who, again, did it without Jalen Lowe, did it without Jaden Quaintance. 2 guys who, again, have all SEC caliber ability. Lowe, to me, a player that could lead the SEC in assists once he's back on the floor with this vast array of weapons. Now, that was the positive you took away from the game, and it was an exhibition game. But one thing I took away from the Purdue side was the dynamic for Purdue's offense. And I asked Matt Painter about this when he was on Inside College Basketball Now on this show in early October, about the dynamic that it was like for Purdue last year to play smaller with Trey Kaufman-Renn at the 5 and with Cam Heide, who has since transferred to Texas, at the 4. And Matt Painter went into detail about how it was really, really fun to play that way offensively and how you had so much more space. But when I watched Purdue the other night against Kentucky, and give Kentucky credit, because Kentucky's defense had a lot to do with this, but I did not see the same offensive harmony that I've seen the past couple of years for Purdue. And it's just one game. But Purdue, and Matt Painter talked about it, made a decision, made a commitment to go into the transfer portal to bolster its front court depth. Oscar Clough comes over from South Dakota State, a big bruiser inside. Daniel Jacobson is also back healthy. But those additions change the way that the spacing in the offense looks for a guy like Trey Kaufman-Renn. And I was at a Purdue practice years ago when Trey Kaufman-Renn first got to campus, and I pointed at him, and I said to Matt Painter, I said, "Who's that?" He said, "That's Trey Kaufman-Renn, and he's not really going to be able to help us this year." And I said, "How is he not going to be able to help you?" He said, "Because we have Zach Edey, we have Travion Williams, and we have Mason Gillis." Now, the dynamic that I think is lost when you look at Purdue is this. When Purdue went to the national championship game in 23-24, Matt Painter that year started Trey Kaufman-Renn at the 4 next to Zach Edey. But you knew you had a player like Mason Gillis in reserve at power forward that could make a three-point shot and extend the defense, away from Zach Edey. This Purdue team so far, it's just one exhibition game, has yet to show that at the 4 spot. It's something I'm looking closely at. Now, Trey Kaufman-Renn produced in this game, had 19 points, had 5 rebounds or so, but you still didn't get the feeling that the offensive harmony was there for Purdue like it was in the past couple of years. And 2 years ago, when Purdue was a team that was a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, when Purdue was a team that went to the Final Four, the biggest thing I took away from Trey Kaufman-Renn that year was this guy's going to, it's good that he's starting and he's going to be a capable 4. He's going to be even better as a 5. And that's what he was last year when he was an All-American and he got about 20 points and 6 rebounds a game. But this is something to monitor closely for Purdue, who, again, is going to encounter a Final Four or bust type scenario. And for Purdue to make the Final Four for the second time in the last 3 seasons, it's going to need its guards, Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, to play as they've played throughout their college careers. Year 1, number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Big Ten regular season title. Big Ten tournament title. Lost to Fairleigh Dickinson. Year 2, you go to the national title game, you lose to UConn. Year 3, you go to the Sweet 16, lose a heartbreaker to Texas. Against Kentucky on Friday night, Smith and Lawyer. Against Smith, remember, is the consensus preseason National Player of the Year. 6 of 24 combined from the field, 2 of 11 from 3. And this is something that I want to point out, and I talked about it with Matt Painter when he was on the show a couple of weeks ago, but it's something that people need to understand. When you bring back a large percentage of players from a team that went far in the NCAA tournament, and they come back for the sole reason to go to a Final Four and win a national championship, it is really, really hard at times to deal with all that comes with the 35, 37 game, 39 game struggle to get there. And I'll give you a couple of examples. UCLA in 2021 went to the Final Four. It's Mick Cronin's second year as head coach. Tiger Campbell, Jaime Jaquez, Johnny Juzang, Jules Bernard, Dave Singleton, Cody Riley, Jalen Clark all came back. But you don't start the season with a guaranteed high seed in the NCAA tournament. And there were some up and down moments that year for UCLA, who might have went back to the Final Four for the second time if Jaime Jaquez doesn't blow out his ankle against St. Mary's in the round of 32. And then you look at the next year. The team that beat that UCLA team, North Carolina, in 2022, brought back from a team that went to the national title game, Armando Bacot, Leaky Black, Caleb Love, and RJ Davis. Brady Manick didn't come back from the team that went to the national title game. But that North Carolina team didn't make the NCAA tournament. It's hard sometimes when you know you have a core of guys that are good enough to get there, to get them to the point where you think, obviously, they're going to be engaged in every practice, in every single game. In this climate, with name, image, and likeness, with all the attention we have right now on certain things, it takes a really, really committed and mentally tough group to do that every single day over the course of a season. But what a terrific showcase it was for the sport. Kentucky, the ceiling should be higher once you get Lowe and Quaintance back. And for Purdue, keep a close eye on Trey Kaufman-Wren and the potential clutter in Purdue's offense. The second big thing I want to talk about today, the injury bug is biting UConn. And this is something that has been a constant theme for UConn for the calendar year 2025. I asked Dan Hurley about this when he was in this very studio a couple of weeks ago promoting his book, Never Stop. Because all he wants to do is talk about how big of a disappointment last season was for UConn, because the Huskies went 28-4-11 and lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament to the eventual national champion Florida Gators. But I asked him, part of the reason why last season was such a struggle for UConn is because Liam McNeely, a first-round pick and UConn's best player last season, was lost for a month, and he didn't play. Last year, and I looked this up today, when UConn had Liam McNeely in the lineup, they were 19-8. They were 5-3 without him. But he didn't play for a month. And now the injury bug is continuing to bite UConn. In UConn's first exhibition game a couple of weeks ago, the projected starter at point guard, Silas Demery Jr., transfer from Georgia, did not play. He is expected, from what I've gathered, to be in the lineup Tuesday night when UConn takes on Michigan State in an exhibition game. And Tyrus Reed, who Dan Hurley told us when he was here a couple of weeks ago, has been dealing with a hamstring issue. From everything I gathered right now, and we'll get the official word later today from UConn, he is not expected to play against Michigan State. So that means UConn is not going to go into the season with its starting 5-man, as long as Tarris Reed doesn't play, having a rep against a power conference opponent. You want to add more kerosene to that fire? Braylon Mullins, one of the best freshmen in the country, is coming in as a starter, as an elite shooter. He, according to a UConn release late last week, was expected to miss 6 weeks with an ankle injury. 6 weeks. We hope that he's not out 6 weeks, because if that happens, that means he is going to miss the guts of what I think is unequivocally the best non-conference schedule that's ever been put together in the history of UConn basketball. But if Braylon Mullins does miss 6 weeks, he would, from last Friday when that release came out, he would miss the following games for UConn: BYU in Boston, Arizona in Connecticut, Illinois on Black Friday at MSG, and a road game in early December at Kansas in the start of a home-and-home series with the Kansas Jayhawks. So if you're Dan Hurley right now, you're hoping to get Silas Demery Jr. a rep, the transfer from Georgia, Tuesday night against Michigan State. You're hoping that Tarris Reed obviously can be healthy for the opener on November 3rd against New Haven. And you're hoping that Braylon Mullins, who was expected and projected to step into the starting spot that was vacated by Liam McNeely, is going to be good enough to come back at some point in time here before, early December. But you don't want to rush anything either. But the goal, if you're Dan Hurley, and the goal if you're UConn, is to be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That was the design of this non-conference schedule, to put yourself in position to be a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And if you're in the 1 seed in the East, it means you'd be going through Philadelphia and Washington to get to Indianapolis. That's always what's at the forefront of the minds of somebody who works, obviously, within the UConn program, to be a 1 seed and go to the Final Four for the 3rd time in 4 years. These games are going to dictate where UConn is seated. These games are going to have a major impact on where the Huskies land on Selection Sunday. And it's not just big for UConn. It's big for the Big East, because the Big East needs UConn and St. John's, its 2 biggest brands, to push out and have major, major national mileage in November and December. It's imperative, because I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm just not so sure after St. John's and UConn, and probably Creighton, how much we can count on from the Big East in terms of NCAA tournament representation. But you know as well as I do, this is only October. So with Braylon Mullins out, UConn is going to have to lean on Jalen Stewart, who has showed pockets of promise through the first 2 years of his college career to be a consistent producer for the first time. Dan Hurley is always very calculated with his rotations. He is always very calculated with how he substitutes. And I think his ability to use his bench is one of the main reasons why UConn was able to win back-to-back national championships in such convincing fashion. The bench on the 2023 team: Calcaterra, Diarra, Klingon. The bench on the 2024 team: Diarra, Samson Johnson. Real, tangible options off the bench. And now if you're looking at UConn going in to a dress rehearsal Tuesday night against Michigan State, you are without your projected 5-man and Tarris Reed. You are without your projected starting wing in Braylon Mullins. That's 40% of the projected starting lineup for the Huskies. You'd rather it happen now than later in the season, but this has been a common theme for UConn throughout the calendar year 2025. Unequivocally, it has been a common theme. And now other players are going to have to start stepping up to the forefront. I mentioned Jalen Stewart. It's a real opportunity for a guy like that. Eric Ryba, the talented freshman, is going to have to also come to the forefront. You're also going to see Malachi Smith, the transfer from Dayton, maybe play extended minutes. I could see in this case Dan Hurley downshifting to the lineup he used 2 years ago when Alex Caravan was at the 5. But make no mistake about it, the injury bug has hit UConn hard in 2025, and it hasn't stopped. The Huskies need to do everything they can to get as healthy as they can, as quickly as they can, not just for what lies ahead in November, but also for the opportunities that will be on the board in December. And again, I want to talk about that timeline with Braylon Mullins. If he came back 6 weeks from last Friday, he would miss BYU, Arizona, Illinois at the Garden, and at Kansas. There's 2 more high-profile games for UConn in December. The Jimmy V Classic against Florida at MSG, and also a home game against Texas. Now, look, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee is always going to take into account when players miss games, but UConn needs to be as healthy as it can for as many as those games, and so does the Big East. The third big thing on my radar today, the fabulous freshmen that we have in college basketball. Now, sometimes we get certain freshman classes that rise above the rest. Sometimes you get a special crop of talent that becomes appointment television. I remember vividly the 13-14 season. You had Andrew Wiggins and Joel Embiid at Kansas. You had Jabari Parker at Duke. You had Julius Randle and James Young at Kentucky with the Harrison twins. It was awesome. But as we've seen, freshmen in this climate don't always equate to the highest levels of winning. But these freshmen that we've seen so far, and I know it's just an exhibition game, are going to be at the highest levels of producing. That much we have seen. Darren Peterson, who I saw last week in Kansas practice, put on an absolute show against Louisville last Friday at the KFC Yum Center. 24 in the first half, only finished with 26. The 2 assists to 6 turnovers were a little bit obviously of, a concern for me, but the offense that he showed for somebody who, when I was in practice, did not resemble a great shooter was incredible. He'll be appointment television each and every time he takes the floor. And we'll see if Kansas' supporting cast, which obviously came up big in the second half against Louisville in that exhibition game, can continue to give him the type of ancillary help he needs. Because from being in Lawrence last week, I could tell talking to the staff, that is the primary concern. Does Darren Peterson have enough around him where Kansas can be a really, really good team in the Big 12? A reminder, they were picked 6 in the Big 12 preseason poll. A.J. Dybantsa, who has played 2 exhibition games, one against Nebraska, one against North Carolina, looks every bit the part of a player that's going to be a first or second team All-American. He looks every bit the part of somebody that's going to be right in the mix to be the Big 12 Player of the Year. His averages through 2 games, about 24 points, 7.5 rebounds. He had 8 and 8. And then there's Cam Boozer. Cam Boozer, who is rebounding the ball right now as a freshman, comparable to a level that which Kevin Love rebounded the ball against UCLA. 24 points and 23 rebounds Sunday night against Tennessee, 33 and 12 last week against UCF. So Cam Boozer has a combined 35 rebounds in his first 2 exhibition games. He right away becomes a name to watch as somebody who could lead college basketball in rebounding this season. We know Cooper Flagg was a generational talent. We know that he was a special, special player, one that may never come along again for a long, long time. Cam Boozer is not Cooper Flagg, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to be one of the best players in college basketball. And I know it's just an exhibition game or 2, but he is rebounding the ball, again, I'll say it, in a similar fashion, from my vantage point, to the way that Kevin Love rebounded the ball when he was at UCLA in the 07-08 season, averaged 17 and 11, was an All-American, and UCLA went to the Final Four. Those are the big 3 that everybody's talking about. Peterson, Dybantsa, Boozer. But I'm going to give you 2 other guys that you need to have in bold print. I'm going to give you 2 other players that are going to be right in the mix among the best and most productive freshmen in the country. One is the other guy that played in the BYU North Carolina exhibition on Friday night, and that's Caleb Wilson at North Carolina. Now, when I was at North Carolina earlier this month, I was talking to a well-embedded mole in the Tar Heels athletic department. And I asked him about Caleb Wilson. And he said, John, he really reminds me of Marvin Williams. And I said, wow. And he said, I'm not saying Caleb Wilson is going to be the number 2 pick in the draft like Marvin Williams was in 2005. I'm not saying he's going to be a player who, like Marvin Williams did, helped North Carolina win the national championship in 2005. But when you look at the way he runs, you look at the way he is around the basket, you look at his mannerisms, he has that ability to come in and immediately produce at a high level. He had 22 and 10 against BYU. And Caleb Wilson, from my vantage point, is one of the most intriguing reasons why I think North Carolina could be significantly better than people think. I liked what I saw out of the Tar Heels against BYU. I liked their size across the board. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's ironic to me because one of the things that Hubert Davis talked about when he took over for Roy Williams was wanting to play with a skilled 4-man instead of 2 traditional bigs. And think about the first couple of teams that Hubert Davis had. Brady Manick was the game changer for that team in 21-22 that went to the national title game and lost to Kansas. And then they tried to replicate that the next year with Pete Nance. Didn't work out as well. But this North Carolina team is put together more in the mold of a team that Roy Williams would have constructed. Great positional size, traditional bigs at the 4 and the 5 with Caleb Wilson, with Henry Vasar. It's something to watch for North Carolina moving forward. But make no mistake about it. Don't have a conversation about the best freshmen in college basketball and potentially the best players up front without talking about Caleb Wilson from North Carolina. And the other guy that's going to be in the mix when you talk about the best freshmen, and I think the best point guards, is Darius Acuff from Arkansas. Now, if you've been listening to this show and you've been watching us week after week, you know that I am more bullish on Arkansas than most people. The Razorbacks return the highest percentage of scoring among any team in the SEC from last season. 4 players back from last year's squad that went to the Sweet 16, nearly went to the Elite 8. Trevin Brazile, Billy Richmond, Carter Knox, DJ Wagner. But the backbone of great teams under John Calipari, except for obviously defending and rebounding, have had a common denominator and a common thread. That has been an elite freshman point guard. Derrick Rose at Memphis in 2008. Tyreek Evans at Memphis in 2009. John Wall at Kentucky in 2010. Brandon Knight at Kentucky in 2011. Marcus Teague at Kentucky in 2012. Andrew Harrison, 2014. De'Aaron Fox, 2017. Darius Acuff is the best point guard in the freshman class and could be, even in short order, one of the best point guards in the country. Now, it was just an exhibition game, but I talked to the Kentucky staff every week. I talked to them every week, and I've talked to them throughout the preseason. And they said to me, this guy's the real deal. And like you guys know, you've listened to me, you've read me for years. I wait and see because I know the college game is different, and I know exhibition games are different. But from what I saw from Darius Acuff and from Malik Thomas, on top of the 4 guys that are back for Kentucky, and then you add in Nick Pringle, who looks like he's in the best shape of his life, and you add in Malik Ewan, I don't understand why more people are not talking about Arkansas as a legitimate threat to win an SEC regular season title. That's a team I would not want to see. And I said this last year, and it took Arkansas some time to get obviously in a rhythm and a routine, but I'll say it again. How would you be talking about Darius Acuff if he played the way he played against Cincinnati on Friday night and John Calipari was the coach, and on the front of the jersey it said Kentucky and not Arkansas? Want to get to your questions and comments in the chat. Want to hear from you. Our show is dedicated to one area, the college basketball fan. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. Your questions and comments when we return.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
All right, Jon Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now. Want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. And I just want to put this out there right now because we started this new venture, in the first part of this year. And it's been so much fun to do and work with the great team we have here at CBS Sports. But if you subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now, and you see me in a New York City bar and restaurant, I've got your first round of drinks. And it's done. It's over. And I will even, for subscribers to this show, if you show me proof of subscription that this is coming to your email inbox, I will throw a happy hour for subscribers of Inside College Basketball Now before the calendar shifts to 2026. This is only October. Let's get into now. The chat right now is bleeding, absolutely bleeding with people who want to talk about college basketball, and we're going to get into it with all the great fans right now. We got somebody in the chat who said Jon Rothstein is basketball, and he spelled my name John. There is nothing more I hate in life than when people spell my name wrong. So I appreciate the passion. I appreciate the fact you're joining, but can't you look up my name on Twitter? It's Jon. There is no H in my name. Okay. Unbiased Brim says, John, Mark Pope's ceiling might be Sweet 16s, and I wonder if fans will be okay with it. Look, I think it is way, way too early to start saying that. Mark Pope, before last year at Kentucky, coached at BYU and Utah Valley. He did an incredible job at BYU, led BYU to multiple NCAA tournaments, got BYU to the NCAA tournament in its first year in the Big 12. Mark Pope has a roster, and again, I talked about this in segment 1, a roster that's good enough, in my opinion, that the country should be put on notice. Because I think you have to look at what happened last week against Purdue, and then you tack on an all-SEC point guard in Jalen Lowe. And then you add maybe a National Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Jaden Quaintance. The ceiling in Lexington is much higher than we all initially thought, at least from my perspective. Mark Finkelstein wants to know, is it inevitable that UConn leaves the Big East? Seems like it's just not economically feasible for them to remain. Football's getting better. Seems like the ACC could be a fit. Well, this is what I'll tell you right now about UConn. UConn is a very attractive place for realignment. And for power conferences that want to expand and get into television markets in the Northeast, why wouldn't you want to take a look at UConn? Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12, has made no secret about his affinity for UConn. He's tried to engage with the Huskies twice. It hasn't come to fruition. But you have to start looking at things right now from a different perspective. And this is directly related to the Big East. The Big East does not have, obviously, other than UConn and St. John's and Creighton, other teams right now that are going to be projected to be in the NCAA tournament, I think, with 100% certainty. So if you're UConn now, you have to go outside and schedule, not to the degree that Gonzaga does, but you have to go outside and schedule to make sure that you're getting the opportunities you need to be a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. If you play a 20-game league schedule and you're only getting, and the Big East, to its credit, maintains the true double round robin format, and you're only getting 4, 5, 6 quad one opportunities, that's not enough to necessarily put yourself in a position where you're guaranteed to be a 1 seed on Selection Sunday. And that's the bar for UConn. The bar is the Final Four in the national championship. Let's keep going through now and getting to all your questions. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. Michael3175, and he says, John, Purdue is overrated. They're loaded, but play zero defense. Very similar to the Zags culture. UConn and Duke are the 2 best teams. Well, it's a little bit early for that. And again, this is just the exhibition season. But I'll say this. I've seen about 30 schools in the preseason. When healthy, I did not see a team And it's unfortunate that they're not healthy right now, but I did not see a team as connected as UConn was. So that's why these Huskies need to get better and healthier quickly. Because like I said, you're going to now go through an exhibition on Tuesday against Michigan State without 40% of your projected starting lineup. Braylon Mullins and Tarris Reed. Keep going with your questions here. I'm going to get a little swig of water. I'm perusing right now. A lot of Kentucky fans in the chat. Jonathan Han Holbrook says, John, if JQ comes back in dominant fashion, Kentucky should be the national title favorite. That might wind up coming to fruition if that happens. It might, because Kentucky's roster is so deep and there's so many different ways you could play it. But thinking about it now, if you put Jaden Quaintance with Mohamed Diabate up front, that's going to be as good of a defensive front court as you have in the sport. Otega Owe on a wing, Jalen Lowe at the point. You could put any number of guards next to him. I mean, I said it before, Kentucky is Noah's Ark. It has two of everything. The depth is crazy for the Wildcats this year. And again, I am just excited that we're getting Kentucky and all these teams in these massive non-conference games. I'm going to get more into that later in the show, but we're having more and more of these big games earlier in the season. It's incredible for the sport. A couple of more comments here. Again, there's so many to get to right here. Now, it feels like we could be on for 6 hours. Okay, let's see who we got right now. Who's next here in the chat? Big Jack 512 says Big 12 president shot down UConn to the Big 12. And, that's fine. I know that Big 12 president shot that down. I know the travel deal, is something to do with that. I know football has something to do with that. But at the end of the day, we are shifting to a different time now. And it's all about the opportunity to bring in more money for your athletic department and for your program, because that's how these programs are going to have the best teams. I will be the first person to admit I listened when I talked to all these power brokers. And they said, John, once we get to the House settlement, this was last year on July 1st, everything's going to be taken care of. We're finally going to have structure. We got to the House settlement. What happened? What happened? Feels like we have more questions right now, not less. And with that said, one of the things that we're seeing now, when all the commissioners speak, they use the term Power Four. They use the term Power Four, and they're talking about the ACC, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12. They're not talking about the Big East. And if you're a program like UConn and realignment is inevitable, that's something that is always going to be on the table if you get the right deal for the basketball reasons that I laid out. The Big East has to find a way, and I don't know if it's within the cards this year or not, but to reestablish itself as a force outside of Dan Hurley and Rick Pitino and Greg McDermott. The Big East has not had its best brands hit at the same time. UConn and St. John's are thriving. Marquette's went to 4 straight NCAA tournaments under Shaka Smart. Creighton has been great under Greg McDermott. Villanova has not been to the NCAA tournament since 2022, Jay Wright's last season. Georgetown has not earned an at-large berth to the NCAA tournament since 2015. That needs to change if you're the Big East. 3 good nuggets when we return.
This is European soccer's biggest stage.
Written in the stars! What a difference she has made!
The question is, can you handle it?
The crowd here feels electric.
Stream every match of the UEFA Women's Champions League on Paramount+.
Jon Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now. I want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. All right, 3 good nuggets before we get out of here. Nugget number 1, I'm talking about Baylor's Cameron Carr. The Tennessee transfer is starting to separate himself in the preseason as Baylor's go-to guy. Looks like a potential all Big 12 caliber player this year. It's a real rebuild for Scott Drew. Baylor lost every single player it had last season, returned 0% of its scoring, but Cameron Carr is a bright spot for the Bears in 25-26. Nugget number 2, living up to expectations. I'm talking about Michigan's Yaxel Lendeborg. Again, I was taking a wait-and-see approach, how he would do against power conference competition, transferring up from the American Conference at UAB. Lendeborg in 2 preseason exhibition games, one against Cincinnati, one against St. John's, averaging 28 points and 11 rebounds per game. He's a preseason All-American for me. Nugget number 3, plans for the Pac. According to multiple sources, the new Pac-12 next year, when the NCAA shifts to 32 regular season games, will play a 16-game conference schedule. That means that half of the schedule for the Pac-12 will consist of non-conference games. That means that big brands like Gonzaga and San Diego State may schedule 9 or up to 10 big non-conference games to boost the metrics, to boost the league. This is a big, big move by a non-power conference who seems to understand its place and how it's going to put more teams in the NCAA tournament. From everything I'm gathering from my well-embedded moles in Spokane in the Great Northwest, the plan is when Gonzaga goes to the new Pac-12 coming up in 26-27, the Zags will play 10 high-level games during a non-conference portion of the schedule. Couple of exhibitions this week to keep your antennas up on. Monday night, John Calipari goes back to FedEx Forum to take on Memphis. I'm telling you, watch Arkansas, a dark horse Final Four team. Tuesday, Michigan State against the banged up UConn team in Connecticut. Tarris Reed, obviously we're waiting on the official word, but not expected to play. Braylon Mullins also out for the Huskies. Thursday, Georgetown goes to Rupp Arena to take on Kentucky. Auburn against Memphis and Atlanta, and then Oregon takes on Stanford. Also want to remind you, during the season, we are going to be with you with multiple live shows per week, breaking down everything from soup to nuts like we did today. And I'm also going to be talking to the biggest names in the sport. So if you want to get your college hoops fix every single week, multiple times per week during the season, we want you again to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We're the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. I'm Jon Rothstein, and this was Inside College Basketball Now.